Well, good morning everybody. Hope it's nice and sunny where you are. Today I'm going to read you from my paranormal book, my first book, Out the Bottomless Pit. And we're going to ask some questions today, maybe some questions you haven't thought of before. I'll start off with what it says in chapter 21 of my first book, and like I said, I'm going to be writing a second paranormal book shortly. I'm working on different books at the moment. It says here, technology advances exponentially. Has technology been even more advanced in the distant past? Technology on Earth has advanced exponentially over the past 150 years or so. The big question I'd like to ask is why? You think about it, thousands and thousands of years, life is just loping along, people, horses and buggies and simple living for thousands of years. But then suddenly, technology advanced very, very quickly in 150 years. What's the reason for that? Yeah, in fact, when we consider that for thousands of years there was seemingly little progress as in regards to scientific discoveries, why has man been able to progress so rapidly? Is there a dark and sinister side to the story? It was told to the prophet Daniel in around the 5th century BC that one of the signs of the last days of man's rule on earth would be that knowledge would be increased. Daniel 12:4. It says, seal up the book even to the time of the end. For many shall run to and fro, aeroplanes, cars, trains, you name it, and knowledge shall be increased. Daniel 12:4. So knowledge being increased is one of the signs of the end times, one of the signs of the last days. Last days, that is, of man's rule on earth. So much has changed in a very short time. My own grandfather was alive when he still travelled in horses and carriages, and there were no cars or any modern conveniences. So much has changed. So what has triggered this great advancement in technology? What's done it? Well, I don't want to shock you or anything. The last time it happened was a very ominous time. When was that? Well, it would seem that the same thing happened before the Great Flood. As man became more and more wicked and time went by. Okay, I'm reading straight from the book now. Man became more and more wicked as time went by, and desired to be more than himself. Even as today, let's talk about pre-flood time, some want to use transhumanism to make man into a god, live forever, mechanically or electronically. Well, by making certain compromises with the fallen angels back then, in pre-flood times, man was given certain privileges. Men were worshipping gods like Moloch and Baal, and the price for their blessing was often human sacrifice. Well, think of World War I, World War II, wars ever since, wars that have been human sacrifice, and hundreds of millions of people dead from those wars. All right, so these fallen angels, sometimes masquerading as gods and intimidating mankind. It looks like when man didn't obey them, that they sometimes obliterated some of man's cities using very advanced technology. Now, do we have any evidence of this on the planet? Is there evidence scientifically that thousands of years there was advanced technology, or say even nuclear weapons or lasers, or there's something dramatic has already happened here before? Sadly, the answer to that is yes. It says here, the following is a very interesting article about how scientists have discovered that parts of India have atomic radiation in old ruins dated at 3,500 BC, or 5,500 years ago. How is such a thing even possible? As far as the history books would like us to believe, since they're based on the theory of evolution, man was primitive in 3,500 BC. But was all of mankind primitive in 3,500 BC? Now that's the question, and why? So in Vida, the ancient city in India, it's been discovered it was irradiated by some sort of atomic blast. How do they know? Because of the evidence, nothing grows there. Radiation is so intense to this day in the area that it's highly dangerous. A heavy layer of radioactive ash in Rajasthan, India, I don't know if I said that right, covers a 3 square mile area, 10 miles west of Jodhpur. Scientists investigating the site where a housing development was being built. For some time it's been established that there is a very high rate of birth defects and cancer in the area under construction. The levels of radiation there are registered so high on investigators' gauges that the Indian government has now cordoned off the region. Scientists have unearthed an ancient city where evidence shows an atomic blast dating back many thousands of years, which destroyed most of the buildings and probably 500,000 people. One researcher estimates that the nuclear bomb used was about the size of the ones dropped in Japan in 1945. The Mahabharata, Indian book, history book, clearly describes a catastrophic blast that rocked the continent. A single projectile charged with all the power in the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor, was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death which reduced to ashes an entire race. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without any apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves into the river. A historian comments. Historian Kesari Mohan Ganguly says that Indian sacred writings are full of such descriptions, which sound like atomic blasts as experienced in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He says references mentioned fighting sky chariots and final weapons. An ancient battle is described in Dronaparva, a section of Mahabharata. I can't say that word probably. Anyway, old Indian history book. Going back 5,000 years, one of the oldest books on the planet, I think. All right, an ancient battle is described in the Dronaparva, a section of that same Indian book. I won't say the name again. The passage tells of combat where explosions of final weapons decimate entire armies, causing crowds of warriors with steeds and elephants and weapons to be carried away as if they were dry leaves of trees, says Ganguly. Instead of mushroom clouds, the writer describes a perpendicular explosion with its billowing smoke clouds as consecutive openings of giant parasols. There are comments about the contamination of food and people's hair falling out. So how could a book from 5,000 years ago be describing atomic war? Good question. Very interesting. Archaeological investigation provides information. Archaeologist Francis Taylor says that etchings in some nearby temples he's managed to translate suggest that they prayed to be spared from the great light that was coming to lay ruin to the city. So mind-boggling to imagine that some civilization had nuclear technology before we did. The radioactive ash adds credibility to the ancient Indian records that describe atomic warfare. I think the sad thing is if these weapons, they had them 5,000 years ago and they ended up using them and wiping out millions of people, they obviously can do the same thing again. But the question is, why has our technology and knowledge advanced in the last 150 years? Is that a good thing? A lot of people say it's a good thing. We've got lots of devices, we've got lots of conveniences, electricity, light bulbs, refrigerator, computers, games. But is it a good thing? Overall, where's it leading to? It seems that most of modern technology is leading to ignorance rather than people being more illuminated, at least in many spheres of life. And I think it's happened before. Not so long ago, 4,500, 5,000 years ago. But why? Why did it happen? Why is it happening again? Construction has halted near to that radioactive site in India, while a 5-member team conducts the investigation. The foreman of the project is Lee Hundley, who pioneered the investigation after high-level radiation was discovered. There's evidence that the Rama Empire, now India, was devastated by nuclear war. The Indus Valley is now the Thar Desert, and the site of radioactive ash found west of Joppa is around there. Consider these verses from the ancient, well, it says here 3,500 BC, at least, yeah, it says about 5,000 years ago, Mahabharata. A single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all its splendor, perpendicular explosion with its billowing smoke clouds. The cloud of smoke rising after its first explosion formed into expanding, round circles like the opening of giant parasols. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, gigantic message of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Rishni and the Anhakas. Corpses were so burnt as to be unrecognizable. The hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent reason, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in the streams to wash themselves and their equipment. Well, there's a more full excerpt from the Indian history book. Until the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, modern mankind could not imagine any weapon as horrible and devastating as those described in the ancient Indian text. Yet, they very accurately described the effects of an atomic explosion. Radioactive poisoning will make hair and nails fall out. Immersing oneself in water gives some respite, though it's not a cure. When evacuations of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro reached the street level, they discovered skeletons scattered about the cities, many holding hands and sprawling in the streets as if in some instant horrible doom had taken place. People are just lying unburied in the streets of the city, and these skeletons are thousands of years old, even by traditional archaeological standards. What could do such a thing? Why did the bodies not decay or get eaten by wild animals? Furthermore, there is no apparent cause of a physical, violent death. These skeletons are among the most radioactive ever found, on par with those of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At one site, Soviet scholars found a skeleton which had a radioactive level 50 times greater than normal. Other cities have been found in northern India that show indications of explosions of great magnitude. One such city, found between the Ganges and the mountains of Rajmahal, seemed to have been subjected to intense heat. Huge masses of walls and foundations of the ancient city are fused together, literally vitrified. And since there is no indication of a volcanic eruption at Mohenjo-Daro or the other cities, the intense heat to melt clay vessels can only be explained by atomic blast or some other unknown weapon. The cities were wiped out entirely. While the skeletons have been carbon dated to 2500 BC, must keep in mind that carbon dating involves measuring the amount of radiation left. When atomic explosions are involved, that makes them seem much younger. Interestingly, Manhattan chief scientist Dr. Robert Oppenheimer was known to be familiar with ancient Sanskrit literature. In an interview conducted after he watched the first atomic test, he quoted from the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all felt that way. When asked in an interview at Rochester University 7 years after the Alamogordo Yucca test, well, that was the first atomic bomb ever to be detonated, his reply was, ancient cities whose brick and stone walls have literally been verified that fused together can be found in India, Ireland, yeah, where we live, in Scotland, that's true, they have them here, France, Turkey and other places. There's no logical explanation for the vitrification of stone. That means fused together like glass, except from atomic blast. Advancement during the past 150 years, now we're talking about the inner earth, inside the earth. Going back to what, you need to see this book, you need to read this book by Olaf Janssen. In his book Voyage to the Centre of the Earth, two sailors who went inside the earth in 1829. Incredible book, just incredible. Goes along the lines of what Admiral Byrd said 100 years later. Going back to what Olaf Janssen said in his book Voyage to the Centre of the Earth, it would seem that things have advanced more quickly in the centre of the earth than on the surface, from the time of Olaf Janssen's trip until the visits by Admiral Byrd. Admiral Byrd was the most decorated admiral in the United States. Went down inside the earth in 1927 and 1947, I think that's right. By Admiral Byrd's time, he was met by flying saucers and stated that he met two types of beings. One type very tall blondes, and others very small like the greys mentioned today by many who have had encounters with so-called UFOs. Admiral Byrd stated in his first trip to the centre of the earth, 1927, that these small 3 to 4 foot greys spent there, and I get this, you never heard this before unless you read my book. He saw these beings like 3 to 4 foot greys, as called them today, but they spent their whole time on machines, obviously computers, which man above the surface has not yet invented. What did they do on these machines? What were they doing? They were causing accidents and tragedies and inflicting as much pain as possible to happen to the people on the surface of the planet. Examples such as causing plane crashes, automobile accidents, etc. In other words, he was stating that the greys were some sort of demons inside the earth, not aliens from other planets or distant galaxies. I think it's amazing that Admiral Byrd was even allowed into the centre of the earth. Or there have been many expeditions which have tried to find the northern opening into the inner world, but have either not located it or died trying to find it. I think the reason for that is there are openings into the centre of the earth, but they are what you would say in Star Wars or Star Trek, something you would call they're cloaked. Somehow it's possible to make it look as if the holes are not there. I don't know all the technology behind that, but obviously somebody had much more advanced technology in the past to do these things, but sometimes they're open, sometimes they're not. Or at least it appears that way. I think it's amazing that Admiral Byrd was even allowed into the centre of the earth. But it would most definitely appear that those in the centre of the earth have the power to camouflage or cloak the entrances to the central earth, especially the north and south poles, or those entrances. We call them poles, but actually there is no pole there. It's just an entrance into the centre of the earth, both in the north and the south. So when it suits their purposes, they keep it cloaked. And sometimes they allow individuals into the centre of the earth. Well, of course, to have powers like that, you'd have to be on the level of an angel or something. If you have the power to block people's perception, well, the fallen angels would have that power. The question again is, why were these few individuals allowed into the centre of the earth? There was a very recent expedition using a Russian ship and many scientists who went up to the northern opening in 2009, but they were never heard of again. Yeah, well, in the wrong place to go. I wouldn't go down there. Another example of this is the writer of the very famous informative book on the subject of the Hollow Earth. Yeah, you should read his book. This is amazing. I have this book. A leader of the Rosicrucians. Not that I approve of the Rosicrucians, no. But anyway, his book's really good. Dr. R.W. Bernard with his 1960 book, Flying Saucers from the Centre of the Earth. He also says that, of course he would say that being a Rosicrucian, but he says that those in the centre of the earth do not believe in Jesus. They follow some god, Ra or something, or God of the inner sun, or something of that order. I don't know enough details on that one. Anyway, going downwards in the earth would appear to be going the wrong direction, and apparently from many testimonies, actually jinxed. Yes, I wouldn't recommend going down to the center of the earth, even though I know the earth is hollow. I certainly wouldn't go in that direction. But anyway, I made this audio just to bring out the point. The man boasts how advanced he is in technology today, but it's been more advanced here before. And we're not going in the right direction because we're going away from the simplicity of faith in God and in Jesus, and we're going and thinking we are gods. And it's the same thing that happened to people on the earth before the flood, and it destroyed them. They thought they could do without God and without Jesus and without his Holy Spirit, and they ended up massacring each other and killing each other off. That's what happened. It happened with the fallen angels and their sons, the giants, and then the humans on the earth. They all destroyed each other. Then you had the great flood. Well, unfortunately, on the same path again. So the only answer is to make sure you're saved. Make sure you have Jesus in your heart. Make sure you receive Jesus as your Savior, because this world is definitely coming to an end shortly. It's going to come to an end, no doubt about that, because of great wickedness. The choices of most is going in the wrong direction, unfortunately. But you can easily solve any of these problems by receiving Jesus into your heart. There's a link in the comments section of this audio where it talks all about salvation on my website. You can just press that link and see all about salvation, because I tell you, it's wonderful to know Jesus and to know there's a much better world coming, a much better world for those that are saved, for those who want the truth, for those who want love and righteousness and true happiness and unity, and a world without war. Well, that's enough for me today. Don't be too scared from this book. There's more coming. Bye for now.